And these people, there are different names for these people. You can call them Illuminati. And the Illuminati are composed of three major groups, okay? You have the Jesuits, who control the Vatican. You have the Sephardim Frankists, which control the modern state of Israel today. And you have the Freemasons, which control the national security apparatus of the United States.
All right, so today we're going to be doing something very different for the channel. Namely, this isn't scripted at all. This is just, I've done my research and I'm going to speak straight at the camera. So expect me to be less polished, more dashing, and probably more annoying. But with that caveat aside, we've got a big video today. What we're going to be reacting to is a clip that's went mega viral from Breaking Points. And they brought on a guest who's known as Professor Jiang. He runs a YouTube channel called Predictive History. And he's here to talk about the Iran war.
That last one is the only one that has not yet come to fruition. Is quite a stunning prediction.
Now, he made some predictions in 2024 that have landed. So the hosts are treating him like a prophet. But there are some things you need to know about this guy before we get into it.
They'd be out of water in 2 weeks.
Some of what he says is genuinely sharp. That's the problem, right? Some of it is genuinely good. But other parts are, shall we say, they end up going somewhere that you might not have expected.
You can call them Illuminati.
And look, we released a video maybe like 4 days ago, went through the team quickly, it was going viral, so we released a video where we were praising him. And you guys came back and said, Steve, this ain't it, bro. Like, look it up. So I did, and we retracted the video within about 12 minutes. And consider this a little bit of the repercussion. I've taken more time, and hopefully this video delivers. I actually have a much longer video on the guy coming out in probably about a month. But for now, hopefully this will do. Oh, and I should say, there are many videos out there of this professor that have very serious issues that are rather easy to see where he's being conspiratorial, etc. There's one where he talks about the Big Bang, gets a lot wrong, about evolution, gets it wrong. And I might take on one of those videos later because then I can show it to you. Also because some of my expertise, some of my knowledge is actually with dealing with creationists, apologists. So I can actually expose that better. But this video, at least in my opinion, is not a good example of that. It's actually an example of something better. He is the most dangerous type of wrong. One that is almost entirely right. You're going to see what I mean, right? There's cracks, but most of what he has to say is legit in this case, on this viral video that's getting him a lot of attention. It's the stuff, you know, behind the paywall, if you will, where it's problematic, or, you know, on the other stuff that he doesn't have expertise but speaks as a professor on.
All right, guys, we've got yet another heavy hitter guest and first-time guest on the show. Professor Jiang, he is the star of the popular YouTube channel Predictive History. He uses game theory to analyze past, current, and to predict future geopolitical events. And he joins us now. Professor, great to have you.
Good to see you, sir.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, of course. So, you know, for people who aren't familiar with your work, I wanted to show folks that back in 2024, you made three big predictions. One, that Trump would win. Two, that he would start a war with Iran. And three, that the U.S. would lose that war. Let's take a listen to that.
In this class this semester, I'm making three big predictions, right? First is that Trump will win in November.
First of all, that is not a big thing to predict. Like, lots of people predicted it. The assassination itself was a big prediction. I thought he was going to win, but yeah.
Second is that the United States will go to war against Iran. And the third big prediction is that the United States will lose this war, which will forever change the global order.
Lose the war. So, before we even get into this analysis, I think that there's a few things that you need to know about this guy, if you don't know him already. The host introduces him as a professor, but Jiang is not a professor. He's a high school teacher at a school called Moonshot Academy in Beijing. His degree is a BA in English Literature from Yale. He has no advanced degree in history, political science, game theory, or international relations. Now, that doesn't mean that he's automatically wrong about everything, in fact, anything, but when someone's being presented as a credentialed expert making world historical predictions, the audience deserves to know what those credentials actually are. Second thing to be said is credit where credit is due, all right? So Trump winning, lots of people called it, but lots of people didn't. And so, okay, there's number one. War in Iran. He said this in May of 2024. That's where I got the earliest statement of him putting this across. And the US launched Operation Epic Fury, or let's call it Epstein Fury, on February 28th of this year. And so that is actually a genuine hit. But is that really that surprising? I mean, AIPAC is interlocked with the US and has been for decades, right? And in fact, from its inception. And we have a situation where particularly there was a link with Trump, and Trump was going around being this tough guy with the popularism. It isn't that incredible. It's still a hit, right? Don't get me wrong, but it's not that unlikely to think that the Iran war was gonna happen. The third thing he said is that the US is going to lose. That is doing a lot of work. Talking of Jordan Peterson, it depends, don't you think, on what we mean by lose, bucko. If he means the US will get driven out of the Middle East, that the dollar system will collapse, that American hegemony ends, that is an extraordinary claim, and there is no evidence that that's going to happen. If, on the other hand, he means that this is going to be very expensive, strategically damaging, and corrosive to America's standing in the world, yes, sure. But that's a much less impressive prediction, isn't it? That's just what happens when you start a war. The word lose is doing the work of making an obvious observation sound like a prophecy.
So obviously that last one is the only one that has not yet come to fruition, is quite a stunning prediction. You know, do you stand by it, and what have you seen so far that leads you to sort of stand firm in that conclusion?
So given my analysis of how the war is progressing, I think that Iran has many more advantages over the United States. The reality is that right now, it's a war of attrition between the United States and Iran. And the Iranians have been preparing 20 years for this conflict. In their eschatology, in their religion, this is a war against the great Satan. They've had many practice runs. Last June was a 12-day war when the Iranians were able to examine and analyze the strike capacities of both the Israelis and the Americans. And they've had a lot of time, 8 months, to prepare fully for this new attack. They, through their proxies, the Houthis, Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Shia militias, have been able to really grasp the American mentality. And now they have a pretty good strategy of how to weaken and ultimately destroy the American empire.
Right. Okay. Destroy the American empire. Put a pin in that. The war of attrition framing it's definitely interesting. There is some merit to it, but it needs serious context. First of all, attrition wars historically favor the side with more resources. So Iran's official defense budget, according to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, is about 7.9 billion. It might be just over 8 billion as of 2024. Some estimates, though, like from the Iran Open Data Center, they push it to maybe 23 billion. But that's only if you include off-the-books oil funding spending, and it's sketchy, in any case. The US defense budget, however, for fiscal year 2026, is 960 billion in request alone, over $1 trillion when you include the reconciliation bill. Even at the highest estimate for Iran, the US outspends them roughly 40-1. That is a massive differentiation. You don't win a war of attrition when you're outspent 40-1. It just doesn't happen. Now, he says that Iran has been preparing for 20 years for this conflict. There is truth here. The IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, has built a genuine asymmetric warfare doctrine, and the proxy network that he mentioned through Hezbollah, the Houthis, and Shia militants in Iraq, it's real and it's very effective. But preparing and winning are very different things. The Atlantic Council's analysis from just a few days ago notes that Iran perceives this as an existential conflict and is deliberately pursuing a protection war of attrition. But it also noted that the US and Israel have already sunk more than 50 Iranian naval vessels and struck over 7,000 targets. So Iran's offensive capability is reportedly down 90% from the early days, according to the Pentagon. So, okay, fair enough. You may not want to trust those sources either. I'm dubious. Well done, Trump administration. You've made me dubious of basically everything. In any case, preparing for 20 years doesn't mean you're winning 3 weeks in. The destroy the American empire language is pure hyperbole dressed up as analysis, because Iran is a country whose currency was in freefall before the war started. Not enough people are noting this, by the way, and whose people were in the streets protesting the regime in January, and whose supreme leader was killed in the first hour of the American strikes. That's not a profile of a country that's about to destroy an empire. It's the profile of a country fighting for its survival. Anyway, more to say, but we'll get back to him.
So what the Iranians are doing is they're waging war against the entire global economy. And so they are striking the GCC countries. And not only are they striking GCC countries, American bases, but they're going after the critical energy infrastructure of these bases. They blocked off the Strait of Hormuz. And eventually, they will go after the water desalination plants, which is the lifeblood of these nations because they don't have fresh water supply. In fact, the water desalination plants provides 60% of the GCC's water supply. So if a drone, and these drones cost $50,000, if they wiped out a desalination plant in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and it's a city of 10 million people, right? They'd be out of water in 2 weeks.
Now, this, at least in my opinion, is actually his strongest section, like in the entire interview. The desalination vulnerability in the Gulf states is real, and it's honestly genuinely terrifying. Because the GCC, so the Gulf Cooperation Council countries, operate with more than 400 desalination plants and account for, I think it's 60% of global desalination capacity. Qatar gets 99% of its drinking water from desalination. Kuwait, it's about 90%. Saudi Arabia gets about 70% of its drinking water from desalination. Yes, and an analysis came out 2 days ago that confirms that these plants are large, they're fixed, they're open air, and they are coastal targets. Almost impossible to defend comprehensively. But here's where the professor is being, at best, misleading about Riyadh specifically. He says a drone could wipe out a plant in Riyadh and 10 million people would be out of water in weeks. Saudi Arabia actually gets only 18% of its total water from desalination. The rest is groundwater. And it has strategic reserves. Basically, out of water in 2 weeks is, dramatic simplification. But it is genuinely a real vulnerability. He's just overstating how immediately catastrophic it would be. The $50,000 drone number is genuinely terrifying. I think that is the biggest point that's coming across. Again, it doesn't mean that Iran is going to beat the US, nowhere near it, but it does mean that it's going to cost them politically. So yes, Iranian drones are cheap, but a drone striking a desalination plant doesn't automatically wipe it out. Iran actually hit one of those facilities near, I think it was Bahrain. It caused damage and it injured 3 people, but it did not disrupt the water supply. Reality is messier than the scenario is painting.
And right now, the Iranians have de facto closed off the Strait of Hormuz, and the GCC gets 90% of its food from the Strait of Hormuz. So I know a lot of people are talking about the disruptions to the global economy, but right now, the Iranians are actually threatening the very existence of Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, Qatar. And why this is important is that the Gulf states are really the linchpin of the American economy. So what they do is they sell petrodollars, and then they recycle the petrodollars back into the American economy through the investments in the stock market. And right now, we know that the entire American economy is propped up by AI investments in data centers. And a lot of that comes from the Gulf states. So if the Gulf states are no longer able to sell oil, and they're no longer able to finance AI, this AI bubble in the United States, then this AI bubble will burst, and with it will burst as well as the entire American economy, which is really a financial Ponzi scheme.
Right.
So that's a dire situation that the Americans are.
Okay, so what? This is the problem. There's like so many things I want to say. Let's start here. He's stacking about 4 different claims into one breathless chain here, and each link in that chain is weaker than the last. Let's begin with the Strait of Hormuz. Yes, it has been effectively closed. About 1/5 of global oil passes through it, and as of this week at least, there are over 3,000 vessels stranded in the Gulf. Oil has topped, I think it's $110 per barrel. You'll be able to correct me. I don't know what it is at the moment, but it's a lot. And the part is, but the point is that this is dead serious. Like, this is a really serious problem. The leap, however, from the Strait of Hormuz is closed to the AI bubble will burst and the American economy as a Ponzi scheme, no. Okay, right. Yes, Gulf sovereign wealthy funds invest in US tech companies. Yes, the UAE was becoming a hub for data centers, but the US AI industry is not funded primarily by Gulf states, is it? It's funded by domestic capital markets, venture capital, and the balance sheets of companies like Microsoft, Google, and Amazon. So Gulf money is a component, yes, it's not the foundation. He's taking a real economic disruption and inflating it into civilizational collapse. Calling the American economy a financial Ponzi scheme, the totality of the American economy, mind you, is the kind of thing that sounds sophisticated, but it means almost nothing. Every fiat currency economy runs on confidence. That's not a Ponzi scheme, that's just how modern economics work. The US dollar is the world's reserve currency, not because of magic, but because of the depth and liquidity of US capital markets, the rule of law, and the fact that there's no viable alternative at scale at the moment. A war can stress that system, no doubt about it, already is. It can't collapse it. Like, it just can't do that.
American economy, which is really a financial Ponzi scheme.
Right.
So that's a dire situation that the Americans are facing right now.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, sir, an Amazon data center was literally hit in the UAE. And now, of course, big tech companies, which were looking at the UAE as a major potential data center investment hub with cheap and abundant energy, probably going to be rethinking that. We also wanted to talk to you about munitions. We can put this next one up here on the screen. The United States is racing to accomplish Iran mission before munitions run out. This is specifically around interceptor math. There's a famous video just from yesterday in Israel, which shows a single Iranian ballistic missile, which is being targeted by some 11 different interceptors, all of which miss. Most of those come from the United States, not to mention all of the different bases, the GCC countries that you just talked about, and the asymmetry of the cost. It's $1 million for a missile, tens of millions per interceptor in some of these cases. With these munitions running out, how does that change the global picture?
Good question from the host. The munitions issue is legitimate, and it's one of the few things in this conversation that everyone, hawks, analysts across the spectrum, they all agree on it. The US is burning through interceptor missiles at an unsustainable rate. The Pentagon is seeking a $200 billion supplemental budget request specifically for Iran war operations. HexF confirmed this just, 2 days ago. So the interceptor video that the host mentions, multiple missiles chasing one Iranian ballistic missile and missing, that is a real tactical problem, a very serious problem. It's not proof that the US is losing, but it is proof that the current air defense architecture was designed for a different kind of threat. When you're spending millions per interceptor against thousands of cheap drones and ballistic missiles, the math is ugly even if you are winning.
Obviously, much of the stocks in Asia of the United States are likely to have to be cannibalized if this were to go on. How's that going to affect the global picture here?
Right. So my first point is that the United States military is not designed to fight a 21st century war. Remember, the military-industrial complex came to being after World War II, and it's designed to fight the Cold War. And the Cold War was really about muscle flexing, about who was able to send people up into space, who was the first to get the person on the moon, who had the more complex missile systems. And so the entire American military strategy revolves around very sophisticated technology that costs a lot of money to build, and that's what the American air defense system is basically, and that's why we're seeing this asymmetry, as you point out, in this war, where you have these $1 million missiles trying to take out these $50,000 drones. And it's not sustainable in the long term. And so what we're seeing is really the puncturing of the aura of invincibility and invisibility that sustained American hegemony for the past 20 years, especially after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And this is really a reordering of not just the global economy, because this signals the collapse of the petrodollar and with it the entire US dollar-based reserve currency system, but also the global hegemony of the United States. We're moving towards a multipolar world.
Okay. First, he makes a reasonable structural point. The US military doctrine is optimized for high-tech, high-cost, peer-competitor deterrence rather than asymmetric attrition. And then he immediately overshoots into this signals the collapse of the petrodollar and the end of American hegemony. He does this every time. It's one of his tells. A real observation, then a cosmic conclusion, with nothing in between. As for his puncturing the aura of invisibility line, interesting, but historically illiterate in context. Yes, that far. The US military has had its aura of invincibility punctured multiple times. Think Vietnam, Mogadishu, the Iraq insurgency, the Afghanistan withdrawal, and yet the dollar system survived all of them. The US lost Vietnam comprehensively and still remained the global hegemony for another 50 years. Hegemony doesn't work the way that he's saying that it works. It's not some bubble that pops on contact with a single failure. Look, the US is facing real challenges. Of course they are. Oil is at $110. The Strait of Hormuz is effectively closed. The IEA is literally telling people to work from home to avoid air travel. None of this is nothing, but real challenges and collapse of American hegemony are different categories of claims, and he keeps conflating them. It's one of the signs.
Professor, this morning, Secretary of War Pete Hegseth was asked a question about potential ground troops in Iran. He refused to rule out that possibility. And he said, oh, well, we're not going to project to you what we will or will not do, but we don't want to, rule anything out. We will do what it takes. Do you think that America will end up invading Iran from the ground, since it's already becoming relatively clear they won't be able to accomplish the goal of regime change or even regime collapse using just air power alone?
Right. So everyone says that the worst calamity that could happen in the United States is if it were to send ground troops into Iran. At the same time, the United States are committed to regime change in Iran. We've never had a precedent in history where you were able to regime change from the air alone. You need ground troops. And so unfortunately, what's going to happen over the next few months is that pressure will build on America to send ground troops, especially from the GCC countries and from Israel, which are being pounded right now by the Iranians. So remember that if the GCC countries, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, Bahrain, if they go, then the petrodollar goes with them. So the Americans need to protect these countries, and these countries are going to demand that either the Americans bribe the Iranians to cease, and this is like $5 trillion in indemnity, okay? Mm-hmm. Or send ground troops to wipe out the Iranian threat once and for all. And I know that there's no political will for ground troops to be used against Iran among the American people. But remember that 78% of American people was against initial strikes against Iran in the first place.
Right. Okay, so the strongest thing that he says here is also the most obvious. There's no historical precedent for achieving regime change purely from the air. That's a strong point, and it's well supported by military history. Air campaigns can degrade capability, they can kill leaders, but they don't control territory, and they don't install governments. So if the goal truly is regime change, and both Trump and Hegseth have basically said that it is, although they keep changing their minds, then the logic pushes towards ground troops eventually, definitely. Is in like, you need to do it, because you can't do it from the air alone. That is a genuine strategic dilemma, and, well, Trump is suffering for it. Good riddance. Now, he says that 79% of Americans oppose the initial strikes. don't want to get too pedantic, but that number's wrong. Opposition to the strikes ranged from about 43% to 59%, depending on the poll. Now, where the 78% actually comes from, at least as far as I can tell, is an Ipsos polling on ground troops. 78% of Americans oppose sending ground troops into Iran. So he's accidentally made a stronger point than the one he was trying to make. The public really doesn't want boots on the ground, at least the American public. And that is the exact escalation path that he's arguing is inevitable. The political will point is also fair. Even now, 3 weeks in, Trump has said yesterday that he's not putting troops anywhere. So the pressure to escalate exists, but so does the pressure to get out.
And one of the things that really comes into question, I think, with all of this, sir, when we're looking at the geopolitical picture and the sacrificing in much of this from the United States on behalf of Israel, is kind of a question as to who and what wanted this. We were actually curious for your view on a disputed report here from the Washington Post. We can put it up here on the screen, F3. A push from the Saudis. Israel helped move Trump to attack Iran. Now, this has been internally disputed by Saudi Arabia, saying that they did not push the Trump administration to attack Iran. However, this is clearly an authorized leak from our own government, trying to at least lay some of the blame on behalf of the GCC. What do you make of this analysis and of this narrative that Saudi Arabia was also trying to be behind this push to bomb Iran?
So the host is asking him about this as if it's some mystery. What do you make of this narrative? But there's no mystery here. The Washington Post reported on the day of the strikes that the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman was privately calling Trump for weeks, pushing for military action, while publicly his government was putting out statements about supporting diplomacy. Netanyahu was doing the same thing he always does, banging the drum for strikes on Iran. And Jared Kushner was somewhere in the middle of all of it, running back-channel negotiations with Tehran, while his firm is sitting on $2 billion of Saudi money. Weird, huh? So the host frames this as a disputed report, maybe he has to, but the only people disputing it are the Saudis, and they're disputing it while literally allowing their airspace to be used for the strikes. So that's not really a dispute, is it? That's PR. At least that would be some opinion that you can come to.
So I've always argued that both Saudi Arabia and Israel are heavily invested in regime change in Iran. Yeah. In fact, Saudi Arabia sees Iran as much more of an existential crisis than Israel. Because remember, Israel still has nuclear weapons, and Israel is a very diverse, very sophisticated economy, whereas Saudi Arabia is completely reliant on oil. And it's always had problems with Iran because Iran is a theocracy opposed to the Saudi monarchy. Iran funds and equips the Houthis, which have been antagonistic towards Saudi Arabia for the longest time. And right now, the Saudi economy is suffering. It's been trying to pivot towards more of a tourist economy. That's why they brought in Ronaldo. That's why they're switching to e-gaming. That's why they're building something called a line, NEOM. And all these things are not working out. So they need to be able to control the oil resources of the entire Middle East if they are to survive and thrive as a nation. So I do believe that this reporting is credible, even though it does make Saudi Arabia look bad. But remember.
Okay, so credit to him. This is probably the best stretch of the whole interview, at least as far as I can tell. And this gets us back to what I was saying at the beginning, that he is the worst type of wrong, which is mostly right. The Saudi motivations are more complicated than the Israeli ones, and he actually lays them out pretty damn well, as I said. The monarchy sees Iran as an existential threat. The economy pivot away from oil isn't working. That $500 billion megacity project, NOAM, the Ronaldo football deal, the e-gaming push, none of it is replacing oil revenue fast enough. They're in genuine, serious trouble. And they've been dealing with Iranian-backed Houthis on their borders for years. When he says that Saudi wanted this war, I don't think he's speculating. In fact, the Washington Post reporting backs him up. Where he loses the thread is the Israel comparison. He describes Israel as this very diverse, very sophisticated economy, like it's, sitting pretty. It's not. Israel's defense spending jumped 65% in a single year to $46.5 billion, for a country of just 9 million people. They've been running continuous military operations since October of 2023. The economy is under enormous strain. So Israel might be more diversified than Saudi Arabia, fair enough, but financially comfortable it isn't.
But remember, Saudi Arabia says that they wanted peace, but they are helping the Israelis and the Americans attack Iran right now because they're allowing the Israelis and Americans to use Saudi airspace.
All right, so yep, sharp point, and it's worth underlying. Saudi Arabia publicly has said that they wouldn't allow their territory or airspace to be used for attacks on Iran, and yet they are allowing airspace access for US and Israeli operations. So they say one thing publicly, do the opposite in private.
So help us understand, because it still feels to me like there's some pieces that don't totally add up. You had, in advance of this war on Iran, you had top military brass up to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff saying, this is a really bad idea. We are not ready for this. All the math on the interceptors that's been talked about for months at this point. And yet Trump still decided to go ahead. What is the calculus that he was making here that led him to take what, already appears to be catastrophic actions?
Again, good framing from the host. The top brass did oppose this. The question of why Trump overruled his own military advisors is the right question to be asking. So let's see how he responds.
Right, okay. So this is the key question. Why do they do this? I think there are three possibilities, okay? And I think all three possibilities are valid. The first is the idea of hubris. If you look at history, this is how empires behave. So the Mindoro kidnapping was quick, successful, and it was adrenaline rush for Trump. And that made him overconfident in the capacity of the American military. Okay, so hubris is a factor, and we see this throughout.
Okay, fair enough. Yep, I agree with him. This is genuinely a strong point, and it might be the most obvious thing that anyone has ever said about Donald Trump, though. The man literally tore down the east wing of the White House to build himself a $400 million gold ballroom, and then told Fox News on camera, I'm building a monument to myself because no one else will. He's put his name on a class of battleships, the Kennedy Center, the US Institute of Peace, $1 million immigration visa called the Trump Gold Card, government saving accounts for children, a prescription drug program. Oh yeah, and even the national parks passes. He turned the Army's 250th anniversary parade into a birthday party because it fell on June 14th. Qatar gave him a $400 million plane. Hubris is not a theoretical risk with this guy, it is his entire operating system. He is arrogance personified. So when Jiang says that overconfidence after a quick win is how empires make catastrophic decisions, yeah, that tracks. You don't need to go back to Athens or Hitler invading Russia for your example. You just need to look at the man who told Reuters that Republicans have been so successful we shouldn't even have an election.
This throughout history. Why did Hitler invade Stalin? Because he conquered Europe really easily and he thought it was invincible, right? And that led to the destruction of the German army in the Soviet Union. So hubris is a factor. Then you have to look at internal political calculus, where even though America does not benefit from this war against Iran, Trump himself personally benefits. Why? Because the Saudis and the Israelis are bribing him to attack Iran. Remember that the Saudis invested $2 billion in the private equity fund of Jared Kushner, who is the son-in-law of Donald Trump. And the Israelis, through Miriam Adelson, have been financing Trump's political career, right? So Miriam Adelson, a few months back, said that she will put up $250 million if Trump were to run a third term. So Trump is getting a lot of financial and political support from the Saudis and the Israelis.
Again, this is why this clip went viral. Like, he is predominantly right. At least as far as I can tell, he is predominantly right. Now, for instance, the Kushner Saudi money, absolutely real, and it's utterly damning, or at least it should be. Jared Kushner's firm, Affinity Partners, received $2 billion from the Saudi Public Investment Fund 6 months after leaving the White House. And just this month, just to give you a bit of icing on top, reports emerged that Kushner was simultaneously meeting with potential Saudi investors while supposedly representing the White House in Iran negotiations. A Senate investigation is ongoing. As for whether or not it goes anywhere, I don't know anymore.
Also remember that if this war goes sideways and Trump is forced to use ground troops, he will probably get approval from Congress, and this will give him emergency war powers, which will allow him to influence the midterms. So Trump is thinking about a third term. And I think at the ballot box, he probably won't get it. But if there's a war going on and you can delay elections and you have emergency war powers and people rally around the flag, then he probably will get a third term.
Yep, that is 3 for 3. Trump has been pushing for a third term repeatedly and openly. He's been selling Trump 2028 merch, remember? Miriam Adelson has pledged $250 million for a third run on camera. As for whether or not that's legit, it could be backtracked. It probably won't. He sat with Zelensky last September, and when told that Ukraine can't hold elections during wartime, his response was, "So you mean if we happen to be at war with somebody, no more elections?" Oh, that's good. People laughed. Nobody's laughing now. One thing that's probably worth noting, though, is that the 22nd Amendment has no wartime exception. So the US held elections during the Civil War, both world wars, and every conflict since. But let's be real, right? The question isn't whether it's legal, it's whether this administration would try it anyway and dare the courts to stop them. And on that, I'm not so sure. All right, we're heading back to him, right? Let me just hide myself on screen so you can see this. If you look down here, can you see it's the most viewed part? Yeah, there is a reason for that. There's a big reason for that, and you're about to figure out why. This is where that mask slips a bit. So here we go.
On the flag, then he probably will get a third term. And the last factor that is very important is the eschatological factor, where if you look at the Epstein files, it's clear that we are run by secret societies. It's clear that the world is run by these individuals who have a lot of power. We don't know who they are, but they control the military. They control the national security apparatus. And these people, there are different names for these people. You can call them the Illuminati. And the Illuminati are composed of 3 major groups. Okay, you have the Jesuits, who control the Vatican. You have the Sephardim Frankists, which control the modern state of Israel today. And you have the Freemasons, which control the national security apparatus of the United States. And they believe that Israel, this war in the Middle East, is key to the end times in creating heaven on earth. So it's almost like a script that they're following, even though it doesn't make any geopolitical sense. Okay, so I would say that these 3 are the best reasons why this is happening.
Well, again, the best way to be dangerous is to be nearly right? The worst type of wrong is the person who is broadly right. This is why the Jordan Peterson fields are happening. Jordan was saying some real things, but then just going too far. And then he revealed himself afterwards. That's the worry with what's going on here, and honestly, I share it. I see it. But it's not easy to see, is it? Especially if he's given the right place to speak. There's other videos which we'll get into. Don't worry, we'll do that another time, especially if you want me to, because I can show you more of an expose. But here, it's revealed at the end. You've already bought along with what he's saying. He's correct in so much of what he's pointing out. His assessment is great. And then we get to the Illuminati. It's too far, man. It's too far. So this is where it completely falls apart. He had 2 solid explanations here. So hubris and financial incentives. And then his third reason is that the world is controlled by the lizard people, the Illuminati. Yes, I know he didn't say lizard people, but the Illuminati. Jesuits are completely controlling the Vatican. Another group is controlling Israel. Freemasons are controlling the US national security apparatus. And they're orchestrating a war to bring about the end times. Sounds biblical, doesn't it? True prophet. Here's what's frustrating. There is a legitimate version of this observation. Powerful people do have enormous leverage over politics. Jeffrey Epstein is one of them. or was one of them. Another is that you could just look at the Kushner deal that we just talked about, or Elon Musk literally buying himself a government department, or the Adelson money, or Qatar handing the sitting president a $400 million aircraft. You don't need a secret cabal when the corruption is happening in broad daylight. But instead of making that point, which is well evidenced and utterly devastating, he reaches for the Illuminati, and in doing so, he discredits the real critique by wrapping it in a conspiracy.
Well, sir, I hope you come back. This was very informative, I think, for both of us. We deeply appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very informative, he says. The guest just cited the Illuminati as one of the 3 primary explanations for the largest US military operation since Iraq, and the sign-off is very informative. We hope to have you back. You can be polite, or you can be a journalist. You can't be both at the same time. Think about what a good interviewer would have done here, right? Push back hard on the conspiratorial section. Acknowledge that Jiang got it right on desalinization and Saudi motivations, and made clear to the audience that the credible analysis and the Illuminati stuff exist on completely different planes. Instead, they wrapped it all in one package labeled information, and that package is now going out to their audience, still as if every claim has equal weight. You see, that is the major problem. Again, look at the source, right? In fact, I have to...
If you like that...
1 second. Look down here at the bottom. This is the bump. That is the huge bump, and that huge bump there is telling you everything. It's showing you that even though that's the only part where he got conspiratorial, that's where people paused. That's where people put their attention. So again, I can go over some of his other content where I can better expose, because he basically doesn't hold the mask up as effectively. But the through line is this. The worst type of wrong is one that is predominantly right. Anyway, I want to know what you think to my take. I want to know what you think to my ad lib, just straight up talking to you on camera. Do you prefer this kind of method? Is it better for, chilling out with Steve? Let me know. And yeah, I'll catch you in the next one. Thanks.